Hi, welcome back to Not So Obvious Watches. I'm Pt2, and this is part 2 of my May Q&A sessions where I'm answering your questions. These videos are long enough without me rabbiting on, so let's do the introduction and I'll start answering questions on the other side. See you later. Jeremy asks the question if the tiny watch pendulum swing is genuine or just driven by a whole bunch of YouTubers with small wrists. Okay, I think it's coming about through about 4 or 5 different factors. Mainly, we just need, consumerism requires change. We've slowly been going in, the pendulum's been swinging in one direction from 29 to 30 to 32 to 34 to 36 to 38 to 40 up to about 46. It got to 46, it can't go any further, the pendulum's just going to swing back because companies have got to make new product so that we've got more product to buy so that they can make it rain. That's the number one reason. Number 2 reason, it's got nothing to do with YouTubers for the big markets. It's actually just watch companies wanting to reach out to larger demographics. So they're looking at more women buying watches which previously would have been coded masculine and recognizing and honoring the fact that at least half their watches are being sold in Asia these days, where generally wrist sizes are a little bit smaller. And so the watches are coming back to that kind of demographic. I suppose if I was going to blame YouTubers for anything, I would say in the micro brand space, I think YouTubers and enthusiasts are probably driving that. We in the community, in the sort of hobbyists, don't really drive Omega and Breitling and those guys, but we do drive Baltic and Laurier and those sorts of folks. I think them focusing on 36 and 38 millimeter watches is very much a response to us enthusiasts wanting something smaller. Interesting question. Why do we want something smaller? I'm broadly of the opinion that we've gone smaller because a lot of YouTubers are trying to somehow mark themselves out as being different from normal casual consumers in a mall. And one way of doing that is to buy a slightly smaller watch. Not exactly high-minded, but I think that's what's really driving it. When will it end? As I said, this is a pendulum swinging backwards and forwards. The bad news is, Jeremy, I think it will end, but probably not for about 4 or 5 model cycles. And so we've probably got to wait at least 15 to 20 years. Sorry about that. A positive question. What's something about watches, a brand or a type of watch that's grown on me? Definitely, I've found that I'm moving more and more into dress and dress style watches. A bit of bling, a bit of class, a bit of formality is really resonating with me more and more. On the flip side, what's something I used to quite like but has now got less appeal? Your garden variety generic diver. When I started this hobby and was thinking about the watches I wanted and was plotting out the kinds of things I thought I'd buy, my notepad was full of dive watches, dozens of dive watches, and I bought a big watch box with 20 spaces in it thinking it was going to be full of dive watches. I've now got maybe 5 watches of that type of my 70 something watches, and I have no watches of that type in my notepad to buy today. Yeah, so I've definitely gone off that kind of generic dive watch, and I need something more in the future. Okay, LJR35 has thrown me a couple of challenges around Rolex. First, I said that I don't want one and never would buy one, and he's asked never. Okay, never is a long time. Circumstances change. Right now, I can't see a reason that I would buy a Rolex, except for one possibility. It'd be better for my channel. If I was a Rolex owner, if I was able to talk about the trials and tribulations of getting one personally, if I was able to do those sorts of reviews, I would get more clicks, I would get more views, I would make more money. That would be the only reason I could see me deliberately choosing to buy a Rolex right now. You then go on to say, what if I was given something like a plain blue dial OP as a retirement gift? Cunning, nice choice there. One of the few I could wear. No crystal carbuncle, no monkey butt, ugly Cyclops. So at least you chose a watch that I could actually wear sometime. Now, you didn't ask the question, would I keep it? I'll answer that anyway. Yes, I would. It would go into the box where I keep the watch my parents gave me when I graduated, my dad's old watch, that sort of thing. It would be, if someone went to that extent, that would be a very significant gift, a very sentimental piece. I would never sell it, but would I wear it? Look, if it was a retirement gift or something like that, I might wear it at a reunion. I might wear it at a function where the person that gave it to me was likely to be, but I think that would be about it. I just don't really like them that much. When I look down at, if I was to look down at my wrist while wearing a Rolex, I wouldn't like the version of me that was reflected back. So no, I don't think I'd wear it unless, I was going to be with the person who gave it to me. Gary Boyle asks, is the fascination with longer and longer power reserves sacrificing durability for convenience? I don't know. Look, I'm not a watch designer. I don't work in that area. The part of me that designed the mechanisms a million years ago when I was a young graduate would say that, look, trying to store more and more mechanical energy in a wound spring doesn't come for free. But then on the other hand, if we were able to get 42 hours very reliably back in the 90s with everything we know about technology in 2020, then that we could double the power reserve without sacrificing durability and longevity would seem reasonable. So I really don't know. Hervé asks two questions. The first is, do I perceive differences between the European, American, Australian scenes? I do, but I'm not going to talk about the Europeans or Americans. My view of that watch community is very much like looking into a large room through a keyhole. Social media does give us some insight into what is going on in those scenes, but that is a lens that distorts as much as it reveals. And like I say, I'm really not keen to talk about what my perceptions of watches in those countries. But I would say in Australia, we are different, and we're different for two reasons: our small size and our isolation. Our small size means the allocations of watches to us are very, very small. And also that distance and that isolation means our ability to share the watches between ourselves is very limited. Give you an example. I was recently listening to another video where the guy was talking about wanting to get a Rolex and therefore checking out all the ADs in his region, and how he jumped in his car and drove for a couple of hours to go to a whole bunch of towns where there were ADs that selling Rolexes. For me, look, once I'd exhausted the companies in Melbourne, I could jump in my car and drive for 12 hours to the next town that might have a Rolex AD. And once I'd seen the 2 or 3 Rolex ADs in that city, I could drive for another 12 hours to get to the next town. That sense of distance and isolation, our small size, makes the watch community in Australia very different to what you would see in the European and American circuits. Your next question is, have I ever met or chatted with the OT, the podcast guys? No, I have not. I would love to. Felix Schultz and Andy Green seem like really charming, engaging guys. I would love to speak to them. Be honest, I don't even know what Andy would look like. So if I've been in the same room, I don't know. I have been in the same room as Felix Schultz. I'll be honest, in those kinds of circumstances, I tend to be a bit introverted. I tend to be a bit socially awkward. And in the Australian scene, someone like Felix is just too big for me to feel confident approaching. I've got to get over that. That's on me. I'm sure he'd be fine if I walked up and introduced myself. I'm just not that kind of guy. It's something I've got to get better at. George asked a question about a recent David Khalil video talking about the hypocrisy of watch collectors. I hadn't seen it. I don't normally watch Dave, not because I don't like David Khalil or any of those other dealers, but rather they're perspective, their view, what they see and say about watches isn't really something that I find particularly interesting, so I tend not to watch them. Since you raised it, I did drag this one up and have a quick look. I would say there was a part of it I really, really liked. There was a part of it I didn't like very much, but overall, at the end, I was a huge fan of. I loved that he actually acknowledged that watch collecting is a zero-sum game. That in particular, one person's hoarding of watches has a direct negative effect on other collectors. And that simply saying, go your own way, collect however you want, is a bit nonsensical, because one person's collecting does affect other people's ability to enjoy the hobby. I disliked that he tended to just wave that problem away by saying it's just a watch and we shouldn't care. I'm going to do a whole video one day on why I hate the expression, it's just a watch. In short, I think it is disrespectful to our fellow hobbyists. It is disrespectful to ourselves and the time and the energy we put into this. And I think it is often used as an excuse for shitty behavior by people that really should be held to account for their actions. So I don't like that kind of waving away. However, that was a relatively minor concern with the post, with his video, and I loved his major point, which was, if you are one of these people who are so fixated on a very small percentage of watches that are very difficult to get, that your whole enjoyment of this hobby is disrupted by your inability to get that 0.01% of watches that are available, then you are part of the problem. You are part of what's making this no fun for anyone. And that if you are that fixated on such a small percentage of what is available to you, you have work to do and you've got to broaden your horizons. He didn't quite put it that way, but that's certainly the message I got from David, and that is something I could not support more strongly. Okay, so Carl M's asked a couple of questions. First is, do I think that in the next 10 years or so, the Chinese will have a high-quality chronometer-grade watches that are available for $1,000 US or less? Absolutely. In fact, I'm a little surprised it hasn't happened already. The way I think this will play out is some bright entrepreneur in China is going to take advantage of the growing nationalism, the growing patriotism within China, and start to market a Chinese equivalent to Tissot, Longines, those sorts of guys. He's going to find a small market that's going to grow. It will spread to the Chinese diaspora in other countries. And then we enthusiasts will pick up this unique, buzzy, hypey, hipster sort of thing, like we did with Vostoks or Casiokes, jump on that, make it a big deal, and it will spread to the wider community. That's what I think will happen and how it'll play out. Do I think any of the Swiss watch brands are going to abandon the AD first selling model? Mate, I reckon they already have. Company unique, watch brand unique, online portals and or boutiques, in real life boutiques, have been a reality for a couple of years. And I think it's only going to accelerate. It's only going to move forward. I think there's only one risk for those people, and that is that by having a contiguous distribution chain, including nothing but people from the watch brand, they end up drinking their own bathwater and losing sight of what the customer wants, in a way that an independent AD may get that uniquely. I think they're going to counterbalance that, and I think we can see it right now by, yes, there will be company boutiques that are owned by Breitling or owned by AP or owned by Patek, but I think those boutiques will be run via a service provider that is specifically a watch seller. Take, for example, the most recent Breitling boutiques that are all opening up through the UK. Yes, they are Breitling boutiques. Yes, they are owned by Breitling. Yes, their distribution and inventory is all controlled by Breitling. But the shops are run by the Watches of Switzerland Group, which brings what it knows about dealing with customers, with what it knows about what the customer wants and how that should play out. I see that as the future moving forward, where watch companies will own the supply chain from manufacture all the way to customer delivery, but there will be specialists injected into that, specialist service providers that currently run their own shops. They will instead end up running boutiques on behalf of the brand. Finally, Carl M asks about customized watches. Is it going to become a thing? I think it already is a thing, but it's going to stay pretty much like it is. At the extremely low end where watches are very, very cheap, no one expects them to last very long, and there's no expectation of long-term support, customization is a great thing. I think at the very high end, where the watches cost a lot of money, where the inventory isn't huge, where there aren't vast numbers made, again, customization will be common because the numbers are so small and the dollar numbers are so big that companies can afford to provide that long-term support to this really weird and diverse range of watches. For watches which are in the middle price and which are made by the mass market, I don't think we will see substantial customization. I don't think it's about the production of the parts. Rather, it's about the proliferation of potential SKUs. You could end up with literally millions of parts and parts configurations that would need to be managed over 10, 20, 30 years. And I don't think brands are going to be up to that. So in short, at the very low end where people don't care if the watch stops working in 5 years, fine, customize away. At the very top end where there's only a couple of hundred watches being made and managing that diverse range is pretty easy, yep, they'll be customized. For the vast bulk of watches in the middle, I can't see customization becoming much of a thing for us. Elijah Stimmer asks a question around sports watches, smartwatches, Garmin's, Apple Watches, etc. And there's an interesting little quirk in his question and an assumption I disagree with. So what he says is there a reason that we're constantly negative towards them, given that many of the companies that we say we love are constantly putting out limited editions, driving fast resale values, flipping cycles, etc. Now, the assumption in there is that the number one reason we don't like smartwatches is because they've got a short shelf life. They end up having to be sold or they die eventually. But at the same time, that you've got people touting a new Omega, but there's going to be a new Omega in 5 years' time. Aren't you buying a new one anyway? The first thing is, I would say that we in the community vastly overestimate the amount of flipping that goes on. Hundreds of thousands, potentially millions of new mechanical watches are sold every year. A tiny percent, with the possible exception of companies like Rolex, a tiny percentage of those watches are bought by enthusiasts which are then flipped. The vast majority are bought by casual collectors who just want a nice watch, buy it, and love it for the rest of their lives. Unlike Apple Watches, where every single Apple Watch will be a disposable brick in a couple of years. Every single one. To compare Apple Watches with a Speedmaster or a limited edition Seamaster just makes zero sense. The other issue I would say is even when those Seamasters, Speedmasters, Casios, whatever, are flipped, they remain viable as a watch. They're not thrown in the trash. They simply move on to a new buyer. Again, unlike any Apple Watch, Garmin, etc. So is there a good reason for that negativity? Absolutely there is. At the end of the day, an Apple Watch is disposable. It is designed to be disposable. It will be good for nothing but recycling in somewhere between 3 and 5 years. Whereas even your cheapest Casio is going to have a lifespan of 20 to 30 years. Something more expensive, something mechanical, is likely to still be on someone's wrist and working 20, 30, 50, 100 years from now. And fundamentally, it's that difference in time that drives a lot of people's negativity towards the smartwatch kind of style. BJJ Rhino asks, if Richard Mille was a car, what would it be? I'm going to go with the Pagani Zonda. Why? Well, the Zonda is kind of like if you asked a schoolboy today to draw what a hypercar should look like, then he'd probably draw something that looks a bit like a Zonda. If you asked that same guy to say, what would a high-tech 21st century mechanical watch look like, it would probably be something like a Richard Mille. I mean, they're both kind of designed to appeal to that young guy going through puberty. That's kind of where I see it. Curiously though, I must admit, I do hesitate over that because whilst it is easy to hate Richard Milles, I'm beginning to see quality in it. Even though I hate how the marketing works, even though there's parts of the company I despise, I actually think we might be missing a trick. We might be missing just how good some of those watches are. And yeah, that's probably something I want to look at one day. Okay, Super Yova has asked 3 questions. The first is, what's a watch or a brand that I'm surprised doesn't get the attention it deserves? That's an easy one for me, Chopard. There's a lot of brands that don't get the attention they deserve, e.g. Ulysse Nardin, but I'm not surprised because brands like that have often done something dumb or done something that's unpopular. And so I can explain to myself why they're sort of disregarded. I can't understand why Chopard, who have some beautiful watches, all sorts of in-house stuff, really classy, elegant pieces, just seem to be forgotten. And there's nothing really that they've done that I'd point to and say this is an issue and this would be hurting them. So yeah, I'm constantly surprised Chopard seems to get overlooked all the time. You ask about the Seagull 1963. I have been hands-on with one. They're a very pretty watch in real life. They seem pretty well made, and they're remarkably cheap. So I would probably recommend them for someone in the market for that. I haven't considered one myself because I'm not in the market for that. That's not what I collect. Right now, chronographs aren't really my thing. Cheap chronographs aren't really my thing, so there's no space in it for my collection. But that says more about me than the watch. The final question is, I seem to be a bit of a fan of Australian rules football. If I only seem to be a fan, I haven't spoken about it enough. I am a super fan of Australian rules football. Spend far too much time, energy and money on following that game. But that's not what you asked. Your actual question is, do I happen to follow American football? And if so, what teams? Yes, I do. Not quite as much as I used to, but I know the rules. I understand how it works. I can get quite engaged at time. My 2 teams would be the Seattle Seahawks at the NFL level and Washington Huskies at college football. Differing fortunes for the 2 teams, largely stemming out of when I lived in Seattle for a few years back in the early 2000s. Well, that's it. That's my second batch of answers to your questions. One more part to go. That'll be out tomorrow, and I'll see you then. Please like and subscribe. I've been Pete McConville. This has been Not So Obvious Watches, and yeah, thanks very much for watching, and I'll see you later.